that was a surprise for everybody. It was a surprise here, okay? So one of the big things is, you know, it's not like today, you couldn't just go on the internet, turn on the TV and find out. You know, there were two ways you found out about things going on in the world. You either read it in your newspaper or you listened to it on the radio. Those were your two choices back then. So most of the people found out about Pearl Harbor really by radio. That was their first inkling of what happened. Now, I came across this article. It was in the Toccoa Record on December 18, 1941. And I do want to read just a little bit of it to you. I know it's kind of hard to see. But it talks about, you know, how things were here in Toccoa. How was this message received? What were people thinking about us being attacked? And there was no name on who wrote this article, but it was a really good article. It was, like I said, it was in the Toccoa Record. But I'm just going to read little excerpts to you from it. While near panic has been the apparent order of the week in many sections of the nation, Toccoa and Stevens County are girding for the strain of our nation's sudden war with Japan, and doing so calmly and with grim determination. Since the news first flashed across the ether waves last Sunday that the island of Oahu, as well as the nation's greatest stronghold at Pearl Harbor, there had been attacked without a declaration by the Japs. The young war has been subject to much conversation. The average Toccoan on the street appeared today somewhat dampened in spirit, more infuriated than frightened by the Japanese stab in the back. Mr. and Mrs. Toccoa are still at their everyday tasks and are likely to keep them even more diligently as the days pass, careful not to waste any energy that might be utilized in building the strength of city, county, state, and nation. News that the President and Commander-in-Chief had asked for and received the Congress's declaration of a state of war last Monday was received gravely and with willingness to help that is typical of the South. The voice of the slacker was not heard. When a 7-day week was suggested for defense industry by the President in his 10 o'clock fireside chat Tuesday night, all ears were glued to radios, but none appeared to be disgruntled over the prospects that more work and less pay might be the fate of local defense workers. So even though everything was, you know, a shock, you know, the Japs come out of nowhere and attacked us. You know, the people of Toccoa seemed resolute in keeping going, not living in fear. I'm going to keep going and building the nation strong. That was a great little article that I found. It's amazing some of the things I found sitting at the library in front of a microfiche machine, looking through old newspapers. But that gives you just a feel for the spirit that this town has, the willingness that it has to back our nation, no matter what. So like I said, I started looking through some of the old newspapers, and this one was from July 1st, 1943. What caught my eye was, you know, we're already now, you know, almost 2 years into this, into being involved in the war and preparing for, you know, our future involvement, big time. One thing I noticed was that actually the style of the newspaper changed a little bit. Right above the Toccoa Record, each week was a tagline of some kind. This one actually said, "Save your waste fats to make explosives." There was something at the top of each Toccoa Record like that each week during that time as our build-up to, you know, strengthening our military forces. Also, there were sections within the newspaper that were regular weekly sections, like news from the men in service, that talked about who got promoted, who got, who got deployed, things like that, individuals in the community, and things that have, happened to them. Also, there was a little section each week of the men that were called to service. And this, July the 1st, there happened to be 50 Stevens County men who answered the call to join the war. And as you went through and you start looking at these things, it's amazing to see how things change from today's papers, right? So this one was from November the 11th, okay? And the tagline at the top was support the American Legion War Bond Drive, which has a quota of $51,500. There's always something at the top as we were preparing, for our future engagement in war. Notice that there was a parade for Armistice Day that day. And there was actually an Army exhibition and all-star football game there in Toccoa that night. So, to help raise money for the war effort. Some of the articles in that paper was, soldiers live from one mail call to the next. There's a story about that. There was actually a neat little article that involved Camp Toccoa. Uncle Sam was a shoe repair store, okay? And they had saved over $2,400 by repairing the shoes of the guys out at Camp Toccoa instead of getting new shoes. So that was an article there in the paper as well. Tatnall Prison, okay, that was a prison here in Georgia, was set to start producing supplies for the war effort. And on this week, 22 men were called into service for World War II. And if you actually got close, some of those names you might actually recognize, okay? And then it happened. D-Day, yesterday, in 1944. How did we receive word? Most likely over the radio. The president would have made an announcement, and that's how we found out. It's funny because this week, our days match up. So D-Day was on a Tuesday back in 1944. So today is the A+1. And as we all know, the Toccoa Record comes out on Thursdays. So this was tomorrow's paper, okay, back in 1944. And that was the first time, obviously, that it was mentioned in the paper, that the Allies invade France early Tuesday. Now, one thing that struck me about this front page is, information trickles down from overseas quite slowly. All right, even though it's been 2 days since the attack, there's some things in the headline tag that's not quite right, okay? General Eisenhower, right underneath the word allies up there, it says General Eisenhower and Allied forces land paratroopers near Le Havre in a complete surprise invasion. Light opposition felt, casualties few. And that struck me as odd because we all know that day was one of the worst days in military history for the United States as far as casualties go. But at that time, as the information trickling out, that hadn't gotten out yet. The information that we're getting is probably information that occurred, that they finally got distributed maybe, noon or so, maybe early afternoon of June the 6th. So it was very interesting seeing that, knowing what the end day totals were on casualties. But one of the things that was quite interesting that was on that front page was the mayor of Toccoa at the time made a proclamation that day. And I do want to read this to you because it kind of gives you a feel again of how the people in Toccoa felt. On this June 6, 1944, when the soldiers of the Allied armies have arrived at D-Day, and with the information that some of our soldiers from Toccoa and Stevens County are possibly in the thick of the fight, and acknowledging our duty and allegiance to Almighty God and the feeling of necessity for strength, which alone may come from the giver of all good and perfect gifts. Therefore, as mayor of the city of Toccoa, I, Marvin Tabor, do hereby make and issue the following proclamation. That this day, June 6, 1944, be declared and set apart as a day of special prayers for the success of our Allied armies and for the supreme commanders who direct their forces in this, the greatest of all battles, for the freedom of the peoples of earth. That the stores, offices, and other places of business in the city close from 11 o'clock to 12 o'clock noon, and that the people gather in the churches of the city for a season of prayers and religious devotions, and for the purpose of offering our prayers for the speedy conclusion of the war. Marvin Tabor, Mayor. Mary B. Smith, City Clerk. So that gives you an idea of just the thought and the feeling of the people here in town. And the one thing that was nice to see was the call to worship. A couple of other things from that page that day was the ongoing article of weekly roundup of rationing news. As most of you know, leading up to D-Day and then after, rationing was big time. Okay, everyone had to ration. Everyone had to give up things for the war effort. Also there was an article where they were looking for 2,000 women needed at a naval ordnance plant. So it was very interesting going through, our own local paper, looking at all this stuff. Now, for those of us that volunteer at the museum, those of us that have been around for a long time, Dale will laugh at this one. The next week, the next week's paper on June 15th, the Toccoa Record, its main article at the very beginning was actually quite funny the way they worded it. The title of it was Indian Paratroopers Activated at Toccoa Smash Nazi Defenses. Okay, and it talks about the group composed of Cherokee and Yaqui Redmen. Now the article goes on talking about these guys who are referred to as the Flying 13. We know them as the Filthy 13. Those of you that are old timers that have been around for many years got to meet a couple of these guys. They came back for a reunion all the time. Jake McNeese was one of them. Jack Agnew was one. I don't remember them being Indians. But the funny thing is like I said, it's interesting to see how the newspaper got it, how the news got it. So the 9th Air Force Troop Carrier Base, England, June 7th. War-painted American Indians wearing scout jocks were among the first wave of paratroopers dropped with demolition equipment on the German defenses in France yesterday. Stealing their war hoops to achieve military surprise, they dropped silently from the skies and fanned out over the countryside to raise havoc with stealth like that of their bow and arrow armed ancestors. The Indians were a group known as the Flying 13, which was a part of a large unit dubbed the Braves. It was composed of Yaqui and Cherokee tribesmen. They were a small part of the greatest airborne operation in history, and not the only colorful segment. Paratroopers in action also included a Hindu high diver and numerous daredevil auto drivers and former college athletes. So I thought you guys would get a kick out of that one.
The haircut gave them away.
The haircut gave them away. As a matter of fact, that picture there is a picture of Jake McNeese helping one of his fellow guys get all dolled up there for the attack. But I thought that was so funny when I saw it because, you know, they all thought that they were actual Indians out there fighting, and you know, they were from here in Toccoa, and as we all know, Toccoa was, you know, one of the central parts of the Cherokee Nation back in the day. But I thought that was absolutely hilarious for those of us that knew the guys to see that article come out. It was quite hilarious, but I thought I'd share that with you this morning. The Flying 13, the Red Men. I think Jake was probably the furthest thing from red that I'd ever known. Yeah, he's from Oklahoma, which actually still fits in with Indian tradition, but yeah, I don't think he was too much of an Indian there. Now, one of the things that, you know, that's a little bit from the newspapers, and you know, kind of gives you the feel of the beginning of the war for us in both Pearl Harbor and D-Day. One of the things that I really wanted to, you know, spend some time talking about today is, you know, life on the home front. What was it like for the people that weren't in the war, the people staying at home, especially here in Toccoa? What was it like? You know, we have a big army base here in town, okay, that changed Toccoa during that time. So it might be a little hard to see, but this was downtown Toccoa in the 1940s. Looks a lot different than it does now. It's a lot bigger than it is now. Bigger in as far as number of businesses and things. So I'm just going to point out a couple of different landmarks. So there's us at the train station right now. The courthouse is right where it always was. And then the Pond Street Bridge up in the kind of right-hand corner. But one of the things you'll notice is if you look at downtown today, everywhere where there's a parking lot today, was covered over with businesses. Absolutely covered over. You had a bunch of different pharmacies. You had all sorts of clothing stores. There were 2 livery stores in town, on the opposite ends of town. There were pool halls and pubs. Beer joints. All sorts of good time places, okay? All of those places that are now parking lots had anywhere from 4 to 15 businesses in that little spot. We have probably a quarter of that in downtown now. And you think, we had, you know, what, at any time, anywhere from 4,000 to 6,000 people out at the camp, total over the course of its time, that were coming into town and needing stuff. You know, they had the stuff that the Army provided, but, you know, you get bored sitting out there at the camp, so they would run into town, literally run into town to see their girlfriends, and to go to the pool halls and the pubs when they weren't out the wagon wheel. And you know, Toccoa was a booming metropolis for that time. Hard to hear that now, but yeah, it was, you know, just a booming metropolis. They're on one of the main rail lines. Also, you know, if you're heading anywhere from South Carolina into Atlanta, you come through Toccoa. So, and it was actually, you know, one of the larger retail areas in the surrounding area. So, you know, people from Westminster and people from Anderson and stuff like that would come to Toccoa and Athens and all that. So, You can actually see good old Gallup Belt. It's still up there. It's right there. That was busy and thriving. But yeah, that was what Toccoa looked like back in the 40s. A busy little town. I found a couple of pictures of some of the parades in town I thought were really interesting. The one at the top had some of our military guys in it, so I'm thinking that was probably an Armistice Day parade or Memorial Day parade. Maybe 4th of July, but I doubt that. The two bottom ones are Christmas parades. And for those of you guys that have been here a while, longer than me, but I still remember downtown Toccoa like that, as far as the Christmas parades go. I mean, you had to fight for a spot. I remember those good old days, but I just thought that'd be interesting to just show you the volume of people that was in downtown. And I remember, you know, even in the 60s, there was always people shopping downtown. You went downtown, you were walking on the street, and there was people everywhere. So one of the things that you started seeing in all the print goods, so newspapers, Life magazines, any kind of printing, was the urgency to get people involved that were in the home front in the war. If you didn't have a job, the government had a job for you. And they were encouraging everyone to get out there and work in jobs that benefited the military. And there was a whole list of jobs just on that little flyer there. Quite interesting to go through that list there. But everywhere you looked, every magazine you picked up, you know, everything you heard on the radio, articles in your local paper, urging people to reach out to the U.S. Employment Service, get a job supporting the war effort. There was all kind of I call it propaganda, but it's all sorts of things urging people. So posters everywhere, anything to get people involved. So this is just a few examples of some of them. You know, we're moving up, keep these supplies coming. Do the job he left behind. Getting the women involved. Your Rosie the Riveters, okay? You know, the women of this country produced most of our war goods, I would be here to say. You know, they worked on building ships, building airplanes, building bombs and ordnance, making uniforms. It was amazing to see the effort that the people left behind took up to keep this country not only going, but to keep the war effort going. And for those of you that was working, they were also asking more of you. There was a time when the government asked more of its people than I've ever seen or heard of since. So not only did they want you to work hard, but they wanted your money that they gave you for working hard. Buy war bonds, buy extra bonds, keep the country going. One of the articles in the paper I saw on a 10-year bond, for every $3 at the end of 10 years when you cash it in, you got $4 back for every $3. Okay, so you got $1 extra for every $3 that you spent. Doesn't sound like much, but of course back then that was a good bit of money if you held onto that bond for 10 years. So there were all sorts of bonds and loans that you gave the government, okay? Giving them your money to help get things going. One of the things that I saw was one of the efforts that was needed, was the government needed to raise at one point $16 billion for the war effort back in the 40s. Now, it's above my pay grade to figure out what that would be in today's dollars. But for then, that was an unheard of amount of money. And they were asking from their citizens to help the war effort. $16 billion. Billion. That's amazing back then. I don't think people could comprehend that much money. Just like nowadays, we're comprehending trillions that we have in debt. Billions back then, that's gotta be more than trillions now. As far as dollars, I don't know. But I just found that was amazing. It just blew my mind. And when you weren't out working, when you weren't out buying war bonds, then they were asking other things from you. Kids went out and gathered scrap rubber. Rubber was needed for the war effort. Okay? Scrap metal. Pulpwood was a huge need as well. If you had any trees on your land, they could cut for pulpwood. They were begging for pulpwood because that was helped used to make different crates and different shipping materials to get war goods overseas. And again, from what I saw with the Toccoa record, I'd also found a poster that said, "Housewives, save your waste fats for explosives. Take them to your meat dealer and give them your fat so they can send it off to make explosives." I'd never seen that before in my life. I thought that was hilarious stuff. And when it came down to it, after they ask you to work, ask you for the money that they gave you to work, ask you to go out and find scrap stuff for them, and also ask you to ration your food. Okay? Some of you in the room are probably old enough to have had some of these good old ration books. For those of you that remember them, had little stamps in there. You had to have a stamp if you wanted to get wheat or flour or sugar. It's not like today. You want to go buy a cake, go buy sugar and make a cake. If you didn't have a stamp, you couldn't do that back then. You had to have a stamp to buy your flour, to buy your gasoline for your cars. You had to ration. The first one, the first poster over there was do with less so they'll have enough. Most of the food production, a lot of it went to the war effort. And you were left to do with what you could. Use your ration stamps to get what you can. Grow a victory garden to supplement the rest. Because that garden could help you fill in to help make your rations go further. Well, that's something that the American people did without question. And that to me is just mind-blowing. If they came and asked us to do that today, I really question whether or not we could do that. I really do. Now, some of us, we know how to do stuff. We know how to grow vegetables and all that. I dare say some of our younger generation would survive. I'd like to think they could. I'd like to think they could figure it out. Can't figure out how to use a rotary phone, so I don't know. It's fun to watch them try, though. I can tell you that much. Okay. So, things in Toccoa changed when the war came around. Big time. A lot of our hometown businesses changed producing war goods. So I want to mention just a couple of them. I'm not going to talk about all of them. I want to mention a couple of them. First, I want to mention the Toccoa Casket Company. Did anybody work for the casket company that's in here? A couple of people. I know my dad did for a little while. The Toccoa Casket Company was huge. Okay. They were the world's largest supplier of caskets to the U.S. military up until the end of the Vietnam War. So that means soldiers that came home You know, those that didn't survive came home in a casket from Toccoa. That's pretty huge. Now, the Toccoa Casket Company actually played another part of the history of Camp Toccoa, which is pretty interesting. Now, most of it's legend, but I have to believe some of it's true. When the troops arrived to come train at Camp Toccoa, it wasn't called Camp Toccoa then, it was called Camp Toombs. Okay, after I think General Toombs from Confederate times. Anyway, that was a National Guard camp originally. And then the Army took it over, made it this paratrooper training camp. So the guys came in by train from all over the country. And as they came into town from train, what did they pass? The Toccoa Casket Company. Going to Camp Toombs. Out here on the platform was always a stack of caskets waiting to be shipped out somewhere. So as they got off the train, there's caskets everywhere. They had to pick up what they brought with them and march 5 miles to Camp Toombs for an experimental training exercise, you know, jumping out of a perfectly good airplane into war. No one knew if this was going to work, but it sure did. Now, when Colonel Sink came to take over operations at the camp, he started noticing this and said, wow, this is really morbid. These guys are coming past the casket company, get off the train surrounded by caskets, going to Camp Toombs. Let's change the name of the camp and see if we can make this a little bit better. So they can change the name of the camp to Camp Toccoa. Well, that's kind of the story that's been told about how the camp became Camp Toccoa. One other little interesting piece about the Toccoa Casket Company, it's legend that they provided the casket with a glass top that Martin Luther King Jr. was buried in. So, Casket Company was certainly one of the big staple items in Toccoa. A lot of people, you know, worked out there. Another local business was the Stevens Garment Company. Now, they made pants, okay? And it was originally the Weatherly Manufacturing Company, but when it closed down, it became Stevens Garment Company, and they produced thousands of military uniforms once the war started. Now, Stevens Garment Company then became Wright's Manufacturing, which a lot of you might know, okay? Which became Oxford Manufacturing, which is now Lanier Clothing, okay? It's still in existence. My dad worked there for almost 30 years. There's still Hornicks working there today. I got several cousins working there right now. They're at work right now today. At Lanier Clothing, off of 145. I worked there during the summers. But yeah, they help make uniforms. Coates and Clark. How many people work for Coates and Clark over the course of years? Anyone? Good many folks, okay? Coates and Clark revolutionized the thread industry, okay? And you know, they helped develop polyester thread. But during World War II, they helped make the inner core of the suspension lines for our parachutes. As a matter of fact, there's an example of some of the inner core stuff in the museum. There's a little girl's hat and purse that's been crocheted out of that paracord on display in the museum in our local veterans section, just on the other side of the gift shop over there. Laternos, it's probably one of the biggest. Anybody in here worked for Laternos back in the day? You just worked everywhere. Gotcha. Now, Laternos made large earth moving equipment, okay? They supplied 70% of the dozer blades, scrapers, turn pulls, rooter plows used by the military engineers. Now they were out over by Lake Louise, the big plant. That's actually an aerial shot of the big plant, and Toccoa, Georgia, what was it known? Some of the workers and stuff lived in the community right there. So this was a housing community that Letourneau's actually built. Mr. Letourneau had a vision for the future. And you know, he was actually very revolutionary in what he thought and the way things should be built as far as houses go and stuff like that. Lake Louise was actually named after his daughter. Okay. Now there's Mr. Letourneau standing by one of his big earth moving equipment. So he came up to the hub of some of those equipment. Also, what we know is the Georgia Baptist Assembly that was out on Lake Louise for years and years and years. That was a hotel and conference center that Letourneau's built. During the war, it was turned into a hospital to treat wounded soldiers. And then, of course, like I said, we knew it is Georgia Baptist Assembly. It has now been purchased again by a Boys and Girl Scout camp organization kind of thing. Not the Boys and Girl Scouts, but another organization like that. But one thing I didn't know was Letourneau's also made artillery shells. I didn't realize that until I started putting this together. But they actually made some. There's a picture of Oak the Hill painting 155 millimeter artillery shell there at Letourneau's. And we actually have one of those actual shells that was being painted in that picture on display in the museum. If you go up the ramp, if you go past the stable and go up the ramp into the local history area, there's a bust of Mr. Letourneau there, and of course that shell is sitting right beside him. But yeah, we made artillery shells here. Now, this actually isn't a part of World War II, but it is a part of Letourneau's history. Some of you guys may know about this, but there was an atomic bomb-proof tourist court, little hotel, motel area, that Letourneau built as kind of an experiment, okay? But it's basically underground hotel rooms, okay? That was built out there near the factory. It was quite interesting in the fact that this was the first of any kind of structure like that built for the public in the U.S. This is built back in the 50s. That was Atlanta Journal-Constitution article. It still exists. One section of it still exists. If you know where it is, you know where it is. If you don't know where it is, I'm going to keep it a secret because I don't want people going out there and destroying it. But I went out there and took pictures. You got to be silly if you go out there because it's covered over in poison ivy right now and vines. The hill behind it has been dug out, so you know it's no longer underground. But 3 of the rooms are still out there. And like I said, if you know where it is, you know where it is. But I'm not going to tell you where it is. Okay. Some of you probably know where it is. I actually remember it as a kid, being able to see it. It's now overgrown. There's trees in front of it. You really can't see it. But back in the day, it was not overgrown, and you could see it as you drove down the road. Couple of other little-known historical facts that you guys might find interesting. When I got started looking through newspapers, one of the things you always heard was loose lips sink ships. You know, be careful, don't talk about troop movements, don't talk about what you know. You know, spreading rumors about what you've heard about the military could cost us lives. And of course, there's one poster, he's watching you. The enemy's always out there watching you. And to me, I thought those were always kind of funny things. But then I found stuff that really hit home. And when I say hit home, I mean really hit home. These are articles from World War I here in Toccoa. There were 2 German spies captured here in Toccoa. It was gathering intel about our water systems, our railway lines, and stuff like that to take back to Germany. The Southern Railway line ran right through Toccoa. It was one of the main supply lines and troop movement lines, on the eastern seaboard. But there was a German guy captured here in Toccoa by our local law enforcement. So, Mr. Shirley, you'd find that an interesting piece of news. Yeah, we called a German spy, and we made the government aware of him, and they came and got him, and that was the last we heard of him. Thank goodness. The newspaper article on the right actually came from Clayton, Georgia, Rayburn County. There was a guy passing through as an evangelistic preacher. There was no preacher. He was a German spy. He was getting all sorts of intel about all of our infrastructure pieces, not only in Rayburn County, but in Toccoa and other communities that he passed through. When they called him in Florida, he still had all that information on him and was trying to get it back to Germany. So loose lip sink ship, the spies were here. That's something I didn't realize. And we thought, with an ocean between us, we were safe from that stuff. We weren't. They were here. And there's proof, right here in our own community, that we had spies coming through. I thought that was interesting. Also, everybody knows broken bridges, right? Okay? They used to be a railroad trestle on the Southern Railway line, not a roadway as we knew it. Back in World War I, it was considered, that railway line was considered a valuable asset by the military. So a garrison of soldiers were sent to protect that bridge. Now they barracked on the Georgia side on the hill overlooking the bridge, which is now where the Currahee Club is. So where the Currahee Club is now, if you go play golf there, that used to be an Army garrison camp there, protecting broken bridges when it was still a train trestle, so it wouldn't be attacked by Germans who are obviously here in town. Okay. Here's another little interesting piece for those of you guys that were fans of the Twilight Zone. Rob Serling was a World War II paratrooper that trained here at Camp Toccoa. He was a part of the 511th Parachute Infantry Regiment here at Camp Toccoa. The 511th became the 11th Airborne. They saw action in the Pacific Theater. But yeah, he was actually here at Camp Toccoa and trained. And then went on to become an actor. And we all knew him as the guy at the Twilight Zone. I remember watching that black and white on TV. It scared you to death. Now here's another one of our local people that most people don't realize. DeForest Kelly, Leonard Bones McCoy from Star Trek, was born here. He was also a World War II veteran, as most people his age were. I thought that was pretty cool. The house he was born in, turns out, was actually right across the street from my grandparents' house. Never knew it. Found that out last weekend. Now, I do want to wrap up here real quick, just talking about a couple of things that are hidden in the museum you guys might not know about. But they're really interesting things. This is kind of a layout of the museum. If anybody wants these last few slides, you can pick up one of my cards and I'll email them to you if you want to know where some of these things are. But they're kind of smattered throughout the museum, some of the ones that I picked. And I'll go through these pretty quick. In our local history section, there's a little exhibit up there talking about Bobby Bird and the Flames. Okay, rhythm and blues band that really pioneered the music industry. It started right here in Toccoa. Their drummer was none other than James Brown, King of Soul. All right, now it's interesting how James Brown came to Toccoa. After our troops who were trained here at Camp Toccoa left Camp Toccoa, the camp became a POW camp. German POWs were sent here, along with other POW camps all throughout the United States. And when the war was over and they finally left, the camp became a camp for troubled youth. And that's how James Brown came to Toccoa. He was a troubled youth and needed a second chance. He came here, became their drummer. He actually used to work over at the Toccoa High School as a janitor. And we all know where his career went from there. As a matter of fact, Bobby Bird continued to support James Brown in his solo career and actually wrote some of his greatest hits. And all that started right here in little old Toccoa. Paul Anderson is another one of our Toccoa people, strongest man in the world. Okay, 1956, he won the Olympic gold medal in Melbourne, Australia, in weightlifting. And there's a display at the other end past the stable about Paul Anderson. He went all over the country displaying feats of strength and held the Guinness World Records title for the world's strongest man for the longest time. It was forever before someone actually beat him. Once he settled down, he moved to South Georgia and started a camp for troubled youth in Vidalia. That camp is still up and going and still helping kids need a second chance straighten out their lives. So he's still an inspiration. Even though he died in 1994, he's still an inspiration to those kids. And it's wonderful to see. I got to meet him a couple of times, and he was a gentle giant. He wasn't tall, but I seen that man pick up the back end of a car and move it out of the way over at the Ritz Theater one day. So, you know, strong man. I'll tell you, little fella, wasn't that tall, but man, he was strong. This is a little gem that's hidden up in one of the first display cases at the bottom of the ramp. This is the original marker from the top of Currahee Mountain. This was the marker that the guys ran up and touched every day when they were training, and then run back down. It was replaced off the mountain in 1975, and the marker came here to the museum at some point. When they were producing the Band of Brothers, the production team borrowed the marker to make a copy of it so that they could have it for the show. But that's hidden in one of the cases up top. So it's been out of the case and on top of the mountain once since then. During one of our first D-Day runs, I had the honor of holding it up there while I was still a reenactor. I'm sitting there holding the marker, letting the runners come up and touch it again to become a part of that history. So that was really pretty cool. Also over in the gift shop, they just got in at the end of last year some new challenge coins, which is actually a copy of that original marker. So if you want a copy of the marker for yourself, right there by the register, they've got some of those challenge coins. Pretty neat thing to have, I thought. Joe Mann was a Medal of Honor recipient. He trained with the 506 here at Camp Toccoa. Right before he went to England, he was reassigned to the 502nd Paratroopers. In Operation Market Garden, he was injured in the Netherlands. Shot in each shoulder and arm, and continued to fight. They patched him up, and he wanted to keep fighting. In a town called Best in the Netherlands, on September 19th, the Germans started pressing forward and attacking, throwing grenades everywhere, and a grenade landed in the trench that he was sitting in with his arms bandaged up, pretty much to his side. He saw it, yelled grenade, and jumped on top of it, saving the other people in the trench. And he died just a few seconds later. His family donated this Medal of Honor flag, and those are his actual medals. And they're right there, just opposite of the stable as you first come down the ramp and start looking this way. If you go through the door and look that way, you'll actually see them on a little wall jutting out. I've met his family, great people. There's a book about him there in the museum, in the gift shop. But great guy. He didn't make it long in the war. Well, that was the mettle of our men back then. Those guys would do that. The first room of the stable from Holborn, and when I call it the first room, it's the room farthest away. It's all about the stable and its history, and it coming from Holborn, England to here. In the walls, as they were deconstructing it, there was all sorts of little artifacts that was stuck in there. So there's a nice display case with all those artifacts in there. That, you know, the guys stuffed in the walls. There were 2 artifacts that found their way into the wall themselves. So there's 2 little petrified rats in there. That's in a display case that we call Able and Easy for the 2 companies that were known to stay in the stable. That's actually one of the favorite displays of our school-age kids. Kids come in there and they see the rats and just think it's hilarious. That's Able and Easy. They were found in the wall as they were just tearing it down, and we thought it would be cool to have those as a display. But yeah, it's right there in the corner. Kids love them. In the next room, right by the door, you can see that one of the guys from Easy Company had carved his name into the wall. Okay, Cleveland Petty of Easy Company. His name can be seen right there. Now, it's one of the few names that you can actually see well. A lot of the other names that were carved in were typically carved at the top of the walls from the people that were in the top bunks. Okay, but there are other names in there as well. But that's one that's easy to find. That's in the next room, the 511th room, right by the door as you go in. So that's kind of proof, you know, those guys really were there. In the very next room, which is the 501st room, there is something really cool in the display cabinet against the back wall. You guys are all familiar with the movie Saving Private Ryan. Notice I put Ryan in quotes. That was a story about a real soldier and his brothers. Only his last name wasn't Ryan. It was Nyland. There's a yard-long picture of the unit there that he was in. And he's the 7th one from the first row of the guys standing up. But that's Fritz Nyland right there, and that's a picture of who Saving Private Ryan was about. So that's a pretty neat little piece of history in there. In the 506 room, which is the next to the last room in the stable, there in one of the corners on a small little pedestal is a little display case that to me is one of the most moving displays in the whole museum. Meehan, he was the commanding officer of Easy Company. His plane was shot down during the D-Day drops, and him and everyone on that plane was killed. That's what enabled Dick Winters to become the commanding officer of Easy Company. He was the next guy in line. At Meehan's crash site, there were a few articles found. And we have some of those different artifacts there in that little display case. The part that makes it such a moving display for me is it's not part of the plane. That's what you would expect to find, parts of the plane. It's not. It's a watch. It's dog tag chain. It's one of the crickets, the little clickers. It's the guys, not the plane. To me, that's one of the most moving things that we have in there. You would think, hey, relics, part of the plane. It's the guys. Also in that same room, there's a picture in the other corner of Jumpin' Joe Byerly. And some of the old timers remember Jumpin' Joe. Anyway, he holds a unique distinction of being the only United States soldier known to also serve in the Russian army as well. He was captured and injured and was in POW camp. And after several tries, he escaped. And him trying to get back to his unit, he stumbled across a Russian tank unit. And he fought with them until he could find his way back to get to his unit and to get home. Anyway, he actually has received medals from both armies. And he's recognized by the Russians as one of their heroes as well. Interesting fact about Jumpin' Joe. One, he loved to jump more than anybody. He would take people's extra jumps just so he could jump out of a plane. But he came here in December 2004, spoke at the high school and a couple of other places, and he's one of the first guys to come back on a regular basis to our reunions. He passed away in his hotel room that night here in Toccoa. You know, he always said, if he could choose the place of his passing, Toccoa would be a great place. And that actually turned out he died in his sleep that evening, after all the events were done. His son, interesting enough, became the U.S. ambassador to Russia during the Clinton administration. The Russian government did a whole documentary on him, and a few years back, we actually premiered that documentary here at the Ritz Theater. The lady that produced it was here, and his son John was here as well that day. That's Jumpin' Joe. For you guys that are weapons enthusiasts, we got a huge gun collection back there. We got 2 Tommy guns in a case. We also have this strange little pistol down there. It's known as a broom handle Mauser. The interesting part is it had a wooden holster that it fit in. The cool part was, you pull out of the holster and attach that holster to the grip of the pistol and use it as a stock. So you can use it as a soldier, as a shoulder shot weapon as well. So unique design. But if you're certainly a gun enthusiast, we've got a large collection of guns back there. In the last room of the stable, there's a letter that was found in the wall. And it was a letter from one of our soldiers' mothers. The soldier was Denver Bull Randleman. And there was a letter that we found in the wall there from his mom. And that's on display. You can read it as you walk in the door. There's a display case right at the end of the stable that has a bunch of artifacts from Hitler's stronghold, the Eagle's Nest. So there's a lot of German artifacts there. Interesting to see some of the stuff that was pulled out and donated to us from there. In our local veterans section, which is the room with the dark blue walls, just past the gift shop if you're going in that direction. Along the back wall, one of our local Toccoa guys, Leroy Roberts Jr., was one of the Tuskegee Airmen. Okay? A lot of interesting things about him I found out. He was born and raised here. He was a valedictorian of his high school here in Toccoa. He was well-spoken, and he retired as a lieutenant colonel from the Air Force. So, stop by and see his display. There we go. And last thing I just want to mention is the wagon wheel. Okay, was a little bar right across the street from Camp Toccoa. It was run by the Latham family. And every camp, every base has its favorite watering hole. That was the favorite watering hole out there because it was across the street. You didn't have to run to town like the Paratroopers were known to do it. You could go ahead and quench your thirst out there. Small little place. There's usually more people outside than there were inside. But that's the bar. from the wagon wheel. That's about the only thing left of the wagon wheel. It burnt down, after the war, but yeah, that was, out there, favorite watering hole. I'm sure some of the guys, bellied up to that bar more than once. Luckily, they could stumble back across the street and get back to the barracks before anyone noticed they were really obliterated. But yeah, there's probably a couple of fights that happened there, the guys. But, yeah, that's the wagon hill. There's a lot of interesting things in there. If you read what's in the different frames along there. Bob Hope came here and did a USO show and stuff like that. So all sorts of cool articles in there as well, but it's in the back corner of that local history section. So with that being said, I'm going to shut up. But I do want to thank all of you guys for your service, and women for your service. One of the things I want to do, I know that we've got, some veterans here with us that, are young enough to still be working. So what I like to do is, instead of opening up for questions like we normally do, what I want to do is I'm going to stay after and I'll answer any questions you guys have. What I'd like to do is we can go ahead and do the door prizes and stuff like that. Let those people that need to get back to work, get back to work. And then I'll stay around with you guys and answer any questions you have. If you want me to go show you those things in the museum, I'll do it. I'll hobble up there on my knees and we'll go take a look, whatever. But I'm gonna go ahead and shut up and let Bill finish us up.
Keith, I want to thank you because you told some things that I didn't know about here, but I probably know a little bit more than you do. Thomas and I used to live across from each other, and we would stand on the road. He's a little bit older than me, but I can remember standing on the road on 123, Currahee, West Currahee, doing our hands like this when the troops came by, right, Thomas? And what did they do? They threw us candy. They threw us candy. And we made it an effort to get out there every day and get our free candy. Thomas, is that true? Yes. I want to thank you, and I know this is an honor coin for you. And also, I appreciate you and what you're doing and helping our museum. And thank you very much for this great presentation. Let's give it a hand. Okay, we have, y'all gonna have to tell me who the door prizes are from. That one?
Yeah, Brian brought it.
Brian brought that one. Thank you, Brian, for bringing that door prize. Everyone have a ticket?
Tickets out.
Okay.
I'll read out the last three numbers. 583.
583. Okay.
We have a book, it's called Images of American Toccoa.
Yes, that's from the museum.
584.
Shake those up.
595.
Over here.
601.
Over here, Nancy.
598. 593.
598's right here in the middle, lady.
Hold on, Pat. There's only two of us running.